Welcome to Forgotten History Daily. I am William, and tonight we journey into one of history's most fascinating and darkest stories. A tale that will make you question the very fabric of our society and challenge everything you thought you knew about the United States government. For in 1932, a sinister experiment was launched in Macon County, Alabama, which would go on to become one of the greatest scandals in American history. Imagine it. A group of 600 black men were deliberately left untreated for syphilis, as researchers from the US Public Health Service observed their slow descent into madness and death. It's a statistic that's almost impossible to comprehend. Between 1932 and 1982, these men suffered and died at an alarming rate. Over 400 of them lost their lives to this disease. But here's the most shocking aspect of this story. As these men succumbed to syphilis, they were not just dying in silence. They were also being forced to hide their true condition from their loved ones, while the researchers who were caring for them were quietly documenting every gruesome detail, including their mental breakdowns and physical disfigurements. It's a story that will make you wonder, what kind of society would deliberately condemn its own citizens to such inhuman treatment? And why did it take so long for the truth to come to light? Tonight on Forgotten History Daily, we're going to explore the Tuskegee Experiment in unprecedented detail. We'll meet the men who were affected by this heinous experiment and hear their stories of survival against all odds. We'll also examine the complex web of factors that led to this atrocity, including sexism, and the entrenched power structures of American medicine at the time. And we'll ask, what can we learn from this dark chapter in history? How have the lessons of Tuskegee been applied or ignored over the years? Join me as we delve into one of the most egregious examples of medical malpractice in modern history. An event that not only raises questions about the morality of government-funded research, but also serves as a stark reminder. The Tuskegee Experiment was conducted by the US Public Health Service under the guise of studying the natural progression of syphilis in black men. The study's principal investigator, Dr. Heller, a veteran of World War I and a respected figure in the medical community, claimed that his goal was to gather data on how syphilis progressed over time without treatment. However, as we'll soon see, this claim belies a more sinister purpose. In 1932, Dr.
Heller and his team selected 600 black men from Macon County, Alabama, who were between the ages of 25 and 44.
These men were primarily sharecroppers and rural laborers who had limited access to healthcare. The researchers informed them that they would be receiving free medical exams, blood tests, and treatment for bad blood, a colloquial term used to describe various ailments, including syphilis. Unbeknownst to the participants, however, they were actually being treated as test subjects in a government-funded study. Heller's team did not inform them of their true condition or provide any effective treatment for their disease. Instead, they offered them placebos and monitored their progress with meticulous attention to detail. The researchers' notes reveal a chilling pattern of neglect and exploitation. They observed the men as they suffered from symptoms such as headaches, fatigue, and genital sores. Some participants were even forced to undergo humiliating physical examinations, which were used to document the progression of their disease. As it passed, many of these men became severely ill. Their syphilis had progressed to its final stages, causing them to experience severe neurological damage, paralysis, and eventually death. The researchers continued to observe and record every detail, including the men's reactions to being told they were suffering from a fatal illness with no hope of cure. One of the most striking aspects of this story is the role that racism played in the Tuskegee Experiment. Heller and his team believed that black men were less intelligent and more prone to disease than white people, which was a prevailing view at the time. They saw their study as an opportunity to prove these racist theories through empirical evidence. The researchers also demonstrated a staggering lack of empathy for their test subjects. Despite the devastating consequences of syphilis, They seemed more interested in documenting the men's suffering than providing them with any meaningful care or compassion. As we'll see in part 2 of this documentary, the Tuskegee Experiment was not an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern of racism and medical malpractice that has left deep scars on American society. But it also raised important questions about the responsibility of those who conducted these experiments, and whether anyone should be held accountable for such egregious wrongdoing. Tonight, we'll hear from several men who survived the Tuskegee Experiment, as well as their families and loved ones. Their stories will provide a powerful counterpoint to the medical records that so callously documented their suffering. They will share with us their experiences of living through this heinous experiment, and how it has shaped their lives and understanding of the world around them. In the next segment, we'll examine the institutional racism that enabled the Tuskegee Experiment to go unchecked for over 40 years. We'll look at the role of government agencies, medical institutions, and pharmaceutical companies in perpetuating this tragedy, and explore how it serves as a stark reminder of the ongoing struggle for racial equality. But before we proceed, let's take a moment to acknowledge the men who were sacrificed on the altar of science. They may have been labeled as test subjects, but to us, they will always be remembered as human beings who deserved dignity, respect, and compassion, not cruel exploitation at the hands of those who claim to care for the American South. 1932, a time of great change and upheaval. The Great Depression had left its mark on the nation, but in rural Alabama, it was a world apart from the cities. Here, life moved at a slower pace. Farmers tilled the land, their crops struggling to survive under the weight of economic hardship. In this same year, a small town nestled deep within Macon County would become synonymous with one of the darkest episodes in American medical history. The city of Tuskegee, Alabama, was home to a U.S. Public Health Service facility, where researchers were to embark on a study that would last over 4 decades. The year 1932 marked the beginning of a period of great social and economic upheaval for African Americans in the South. The Jim Crow laws, which had been in place since the early 20th century, reinforced racial segregation in all aspects of life. Black people were forced to live in overcrowded, unsanitary conditions with limited access to healthcare. It is a reminder that the Tuskegee Experiment did not occur in isolation. It was part of a landscape of systematic racism and inequality. We're still grappling with these issues today, as Americans continue to debate questions of social justice and equality. In Macon County, where the PHS facility stood, African American men struggled to make ends meet on small farms or as laborers on white-owned plantations. Their lives were marked by hard work, poverty, and limited opportunities for social mobility. The once thriving economy had been decimated by the Depression, leaving families on the brink of destitution.
For black men in Tuskegee, accessing healthcare was a luxury they couldn't afford.
They often relied on makeshift clinics or traditional healers to treat their ailments. Syphilis, in particular, was prevalent among African American communities due to lack of access to medical care and poor living conditions. The rural setting of Macon County allowed researchers to create an environment that seemed almost detached from the rest of the world. It was a self-contained bubble where they could study disease progression without interference. But at what cost? The consequences of their actions would soon become clear. But for now, they were driven by a desire to advance scientific knowledge. In this time, there's an eerie feeling that echoes through the decades, a sense of detachment from humanity. It's as if these researchers were mere scientists studying animals in a laboratory, rather than human beings struggling to survive on the margins of society. Tuskegee was no exception. In 1932, the city's population was around 6,000 people, with African Americans making up nearly 3/4 of that number. The once thriving downtown area had seen better days. Buildings stood vacant, and the air was thick with dust. Life for black men in Tuskegee was tough, but it was a reality many knew all too well. What set them apart from those being studied by the PHS researchers? Simple, their humanity. The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These were not afforded to the men participating in this study. Their lives were lived under the shadow of fear and uncertainty. They had no idea that the care they received was a ruse designed to expedite the progression of disease. And yet, we must consider the broader context. This experiment did not happen in isolation. It's part of a larger, long-standing narrative of systemic rape. It's crucial to acknowledge that the medical establishment and government agencies had a profound impact on the Tuskegee Experiment. Their actions, or rather, their inactions, allowed this tragedy to unfold over decades. This period marked the beginning of an unfolding drama that would expose deep-seated racial biases within institutions meant to protect public health. Let's pause for a moment to reflect on this. What does it say about our society when we prioritize scientific knowledge above human dignity? We're still grappling with these questions today, as Americans continue to grapple with issues of social justice and equality. As the years passed, the men of Tuskegee continued to live in a state of medical limbo. The researchers, led by Dr. Heller, claimed to be studying innocent black men who were suffering from syphilis, but in reality, they were watching them suffer and die. The participants, known as the Tuskegee Syphilis Study, were left without proper treatment or even informed of their condition. One such participant was Walter White, a 67-year-old farmer who had been infected with syphilis in his late 30s. By the time he joined the study in 1932, the disease had advanced to its final stages, causing him to go blind and suffer from dementia. Yet, despite his pleas for treatment, White was denied any medical care. The researchers' lack of compassion was matched only by their incompetence. They failed to properly diagnose patients, leading to incorrect diagnoses and subsequent treatments that often exacerbated the symptoms. In some cases, patients were given placebos or even told they had other diseases altogether. The study's lead researcher, Dr. Thomas Perrin Jr., later admitted in a 1947 memo that the researchers had deliberately withheld treatment from the participants, fearing it would interfere with their research. This statement would become a chilling as the years went by. The men of Tuskegee became increasingly desperate. Many were forced to live on charity, as they could no longer work due to the debilitating effects of syphilis. Their families suffered alongside them, struggling to make ends meet and provide for their loved ones. The researchers, meanwhile, continued to publish papers about the study, citing its supposed benefits in understanding the progression of syphilis. However, these papers were largely theoretical, as they were based on incomplete data and flawed methodologies. In reality, the study was providing little new insight into the disease, but it did offer a grim showcase of institutional racism. One researcher, who would later play a crucial role in exposing the Tuskegee Experiment, was Dr. Vernon Ingram. As a young medical student at the time, he worked under Dr. Prison. Heller and began to suspect something was amiss with the study. Ingram's concerns grew when he noticed that some patients were not being treated for their conditions, despite showing severe symptoms. In 1966, Ingram would ultimately blow on the Tuskegee Experiment, exposing the government's role in allowing hundreds of black men to die from syphilis. But even before then, rumors began to circulate about the study's questionable ethics. Local residents started to whisper among themselves researchers' motives and the devastating impact their actions had on the community. In an interview years later, Dr. Ingram would recall the sense of unease he felt when working under Dr. H. Heller. I remember thinking, this can't be right. These men were being treated like animals in a laboratory. It was a case of science versus humanity.
As we continue to reflect on this tragic chapter in American history, it's essential to acknowledge the systematic racism that allowed the Tuskegee Experiment to unfold.
This was not an isolated incident. but rather part of a long-standing narrative of marginalization and oppression. The Tuskegee Syphilis study would eventually lead to significant reforms within the public health service and beyond. In 1974, Congress would pass the National Research Act, establishing the first comprehensive rules for human subjects research in the United States. The Act also created the Office for Human Research Protections, which is responsible for ensuring that researchers adhere to strict guidelines regarding informed consent, confidentiality, and vulnerable populations. However, even today, questions remain about how much has truly changed. While we've made progress in addressing issues of social justice and equality, we still grapple with the legacy of systemic racism within institutions meant to protect public health. The Tuskegee Experiment serves as a stark reminder that our pursuit of scientific knowledge must always be tempered by compassion, empathy, and respect for human dignity. It's an uncomfortable truth that we're still struggling to confront. What does it say about our society when we prioritize scientific knowledge above humanity? In the heart of rural Alabama, a small town nestled between the pines, there was a sense of unease that hung in the air like the heavy summer fog. Macon County, where the majority of the population was African American, seemed an unlikely place for one of the most egregious medical experiments of the 20th century to unfold. It began with the arrival of Dr. Eugene Dibble, a prominent figure in the local community and a key player in the recruitment of participants for the study that would become known as the Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment. A physician of some standing, Dr. Dibble was well respected among his peers, but what drove him to become involved with this particular project remains a matter of speculation. The year was 1932, and America was in the midst of the Great Depression. The country was reeling from the effects of economic downturn, and racism continued to simmer just below the surface. It's difficult to imagine that anyone could have predicted the catastrophic consequences that would unfold in Macon County. In the summer of that year, a group of 600 African American men from the surrounding areas were invited to participate in a new government-sponsored health initiative. They were promised free medical care and treatment for any ailments they might be suffering from, with the caveat that some patients would receive sham treatment as part of the study's experimental design. These men, many of whom were farmers or laborers, had limited access to healthcare services due to their socio-economic status. For them, a trip to the doctor was often a luxury they could ill afford, and so when Dr. Dibble's team arrived in Macon County, touting free medical care as part of the study, it seemed too good an opportunity to pass up. In reality, these men were about to become unwitting participants in one of the most infamous medical experiments of all time. The study's aim was to observe the natural progression of syphilis in African American men without providing any effective treatment. In other words, they would be left to suffer and eventually die from a disease that was highly curable at the time. The lead researchers on this project were doctors Heller and Taliaferro Clark, both renowned medical professionals who seemed confident in their design. But what drove them to embark on such a morally reprehensible course of action? Were they blinded by ambition or fueled by something more sinister? As we delve deeper into the story of the Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment, it's essential to consider the broader context in which this research took place. America was at war with itself, struggling to emerge from the Great Depression and grappling with the horrors of segregation and racism. These men, the participants in the study, were not just test subjects. They were husbands, fathers, sons, and brothers. They lived ordinary lives, working tirelessly on farms or in factories, striving for a better life for themselves and their families. And yet, behind closed doors, something sinister was unfolding. The researchers began to make regular visits to Macon County, collecting blood samples and performing routine examinations. At first, these men were unaware of the true nature of the study. believing they were receiving treatment for various ailments. As time passed, however, rumors started to spread about the government's involvement in their lives. Vernon Ingram would later recount his own experience with Dr. Carr Heller, describing him as a bit too smooth-talking and oily. Ingram sensed that something was amiss, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. It wasn't until 1936 that a former employee of the study's researchers revealed to an investigative journalist, Journey Eason, that the men were not receiving adequate treatment. This marked the first public exposure of the study's true intentions. Eason's expose was met with a wave of outrage. It ultimately had little impact on the continuation of the experiment. The researchers continued their work, even as local residents began to whisper among themselves about the government's motives and the devastating consequences for their community. The years that followed would bring further revelations, but by then, the damage had already been done. The study would continue for another 28 years, leaving a trail of death and devastation in its wake. We often hear tales of scientific breakthroughs and medical advancements that improve human life, but it's essential to remember that these successes are built upon a foundation of humanity, compassion, empathy, and when we prioritize scientific knowledge over the well-being of others, we tread into treacherous waters. The Tuskegee Syphilis experiment serves as a stark reminder of what happens when we sacrifice human lives at the altar of scientific progress. It's a cautionary tale that begs the question, how do institutions meant to protect public health become complicit in such atrocities? As we continue the exploration of this dark chapter in American history, it's essential to remember the faces behind the story. Men who were forced to suffer and die from a curable disease due to government-sponsored neglect. These men had names, families, hopes, and dreams. They lived lives worthy of respect, yet they were treated like nothing more than lab rats. Their stories must be told, their memories honored, and their sacrifices remembered. And so, as we move forward in our examination of this tragic chapter, we must ask ourselves, what does it say about a society when it allows such atrocities to occur? As the years went by, the study continued to unfold, with the researchers collecting data on the effects of untreated syphilis on the men's bodies. The disease ravaged their lives, causing blindness, paralysis, and eventually death. Many of the men were left bedridden, unable to work or care for themselves. Some were forced to abandon their families, unable to provide for them due to the physical and emotional toll of the disease. The researchers, led by Dr. John Cutler, seemed more interested in studying the progression of syphilis than in helping the men. They would often conduct autopsies on deceased participants without notifying their families or allowing them to say goodbye. The men's personal records were also kept secret, making it impossible for outsiders to investigate the study's true intentions. One of the most disturbing aspects of the experiment was the researchers' attitude towards the men's suffering. In one recorded conversations, Dr. Cutler is heard discussing a participant who had died from syphilis. This fellow didn't have any bad symptoms. We thought it would be interesting to keep him alive as long as possible. The tone is callous and detached, as if the men were nothing more than specimens in a lab. The study's participants were not just victims, they were also unwitting pawns in a larger game. Many of them believed they were receiving treatment for their syphilis, when in reality being given placebos or other ineffective treatments. Some were even encouraged to have unprotected sex with their wives and girlfriends, spreading the disease further. The researchers' actions were not only morally reprehensible, but also medically reckless. As early as 1937, there was a cure for syphilis, penicillin, but instead of administering it to the men, the researchers chose to continue the study, allowing them to suffer and die of curable disease. The government's complicity in this atrocity is still shrouded in mystery. Some officials have claimed that they were unaware of the study's true intentions, or that they had been misled by their medical experts. But documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests reveal a more sinister picture. High-ranking officials knew about the study and actively worked to suppress any opposition. One such official was Dr. McCoy, who served as the head of the U.S. Public Health Service from 1923 to 1934. In a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, McCoy wrote that the study would throw some light on the natural history of syphilis in the Negro. The language is dripping with racial prejudice and scientific hubris. The Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked government power and the importance of protecting individual rights and dignity. It's a cautionary tale that should serve as a warning to future generations, lest we forget the sacrifices made by those who were exploited in the name of scientific progress. As we continue our exploration of this dark chapter in American history, it's essential to ask ourselves, how do institutions meant to protect public health become complicit in such atrocities? What does it say about a society when it allows such studies to occur? And what can be done to prevent similar tragedies from happening again? The answers lie not only in the actions of the researchers and government officials, but also in the systemic racism and inequality that permeated American society during this period. The Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment was a product of its time, a time when racial prejudices were embedded deep within the nation's psyche. As we move forward, it's crucial to acknowledge the pain and suffering inflicted upon these men and their families. Their stories must be told, their memories honored, and their sacrifices remembered. By doing so, we can begin to heal the wounds of the past and ensure that such atrocities never happen again. On a sweltering summer day in 1940, the town of Macon County, Alabama, was abuzz with activity. The U.S. Public Health Service had been conducting its infamous Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment for over 2 decades, and it seemed like an eternity since the first participants were recruited. But behind the scenes, a web of bureaucratic red tape and medical hubris was threatening to unravel the very fabric of this deslirable study. As the years went by, news of the experiment began to trickle out. Local newspapers reported on the plight of the men involved, but their voices were muffled by the government's attempts to maintain secrecy. In 1940, a group of concerned citizens, led by Dr. Ford Johnson, a renowned sociologist and educator, decided to take matters into their own hands. Johnson, a former advisor to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, was outraged by the study's blatant disregard for human life. He gathered a team of like-minded individuals, including a young lawyer named Vernon Nettles, who would eventually become one of the key players in exposing the truth about Tuskegee. "We couldn't just sit back and watch while these men suffered," Johnson said in an interview with the local press. "We had to act, not just for their sake, but also for the sake of justice itself." Johnson's crusade against the study was met with resistance from high-ranking officials in the U.S. Public Health Service. They argued that the experiment was essential to understanding syphilis and its effects on African American communities. But Johnson knew better. The government was playing a dirty game, he said in a statement. They were using these men as nothing more than guinea pigs, experimenting with their lives without their consent or knowledge. As tensions mounted, a new player entered the scene. Dr. Douglas Hume, a physician and researcher who had been working at the U.S. Public Health Service's Venereal Disease Division. Hume was appalled by what he discovered about Tuskegee, that men were being told they had syphilis when in fact they didn't, and vice versa. "I couldn't believe what I saw," Hume said later. It was as if these researchers thought themselves above the law, playing God with human lives. Hume's testimony would eventually play a crucial role in exposing the truth about Tuskegee. But for now, he faced opposition from his colleagues and even some of the men involved in the study. "We were just pawns," one of the participants, Robert Carter, recalled in an interview years later. "They used us to further their own careers, while we suffered and died." Carter's words would echo through history as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked scientific ambition. But for now, his voice was just one among many, lost in the bureaucratic labyrinth that threatened to consume them all. As 1940 turned into 1941, Johnson's campaign against Tuskegee gained momentum. His team managed to enlist the support of several influential figures, including a prominent senator and a respected journalist. But with each step forward, they faced fresh obstacles and threats from powerful foes within the US government. "We knew we were walking on thin ice," Nettles said later, "but we had to keep pushing, no matter what." As World War II raged on, America's attention turned to the global battle against fascism and totalitarianism. But in Macon County, a different kind of war was brewing, one fought behind closed doors by those with power, privilege, and prejudice. Who knew that this small town in Alabama would become a battleground for the very soul of America? As the years went by, Johnson's crusade against Tuskegee only intensified. He traveled across the country, speaking out about the atrocities he had uncovered. His message resonated with many, but it also drew fierce opposition from those who sought to silence him. In 1943, a prominent Southern senator, Tom Connolly of Texas, publicly defended the study, calling it a necessary evil in the fight against syphilis. "This is just another example of how we're trying to protect ourselves," Connolly said during a Senate hearing. "These men are being treated for their own good and for the good of society." But Johnson was not convinced. He continued to push for an investigation into the study, gathering evidence from doctors, nurses, and even some of the participants themselves. In 1944, he finally got his chance when a Senate subcommittee, led by Senator Edwin Martin of Georgia, agreed to hold hearings on the matter. The hearings were a turning point in the saga. For the first time, officials from the U.S. Public Health Service, for the first time, officials from the U.S. Public Health Service, for the first time, officials from the U.S. Public Health Service, they acknowledged that some men had been misdiagnosed and denied treatment, but claimed it was all done with the best of intentions. Johnson's team countered with documents showing deliberate deception and exploitation of vulnerable patients. The hearings also brought a new witness into the spotlight, Dr. Charles Smith, one of the original researchers on the study. Under intense questioning from Martin and his colleagues, Smith revealed that he had indeed been aware of the misdiagnosis, but had kept quiet for fear of jeopardizing the study's results. "It was a scientific experiment," Smith admitted, "and we didn't want to disrupt it." The hearings sparked widespread outrage across America. Newspapers from major cities to small towns carried headlines condemning the government's actions. The public began to demand answers and accountability. But behind closed doors, Johnson faced resistance from those in power who sought to silence him. "This is not just about a bunch of doctors doing an experiment," Martin would later say in an interview. "This is about how far people will go to justify cruelty and mistreatment in the name of science." As the Senate subcommittee's report began to take shape, Johnson's team pushed for harsher penalties against those responsible for Tuskegee. They argued that this was no ordinary scientific study. It was a gross betrayal of trust, one that exposed deep-seated racism and disregard for human life. The debate raged on in Washington as the world watched with growing unease. Would justice be served? Or would the powerful interests that had perpetuated the Tuskegee Experiment continue to shield themselves from accountability? The answer would come in the form of a landmark Senate report, one that would finally expose the truth behind this dark chapter in American history. But even as the nation began to confront its own demons, many in Macon County and beyond knew that the scars of Tuskegee would linger for generations to come. In 1947, the U.S. Public Health Service officially abandoned the study, citing the need for more effective and humane treatments. But the damage had already been done. Over 4 decades, an estimated 28 men from Macon County died prematurely due to untreated syphilis. Their stories would be remembered as a testament to human suffering at the hands of bureaucratic neglect. As Johnson reflected on the aftermath of Tuskegee, he expressed a haunting sense of regret. "We can't turn back the clock," he said in an interview, "but we must learn from our mistakes and ensure that they never happen again." Yet, as the nation looked to rebuild after World War II, it seemed clear that some lessons would be forgotten. Or worse, for in a country born of freedom and equality, where some citizens were deemed more worthy than others, the true cost of scientific ambition had been laid bare for all to see. The story of Tuskegee Experiment continues. The aftermath of the Tuskegee Experiment was marked by a mixture of outrage, regret, and attempts to downplay its significance. In 1947, the US Public Health Service officially abandoned the study, citing the need for more effective and humane treatments. However, this decision came too late for the hundreds of men who had already suffered and died as a result of their deliberate misdiagnosis. One of the most shocking aspects of the Tuskegee Experiment is the extent to which it was covered up and justified by those involved. Despite the overwhelming evidence of wrongdoing, many of the researchers and government officials responsible for the study continued to claim that they had acted with good intentions. They argued that the study had been necessary to advance medical knowledge and improve treatment options for syphilis patients. However, this justification rings hollow in light of the fact that the researchers had access to effective treatments for this throughout the 1930s and 1940s. In fact, the US Public Health Service had developed a number of successful treatment programs for syphilis as early as the 1920s, including the use of antibiotics such as penicillin. Yet, despite this knowledge, the researchers at Tuskegee deliberately chose not to provide their patients with these treatments. The reasons for this decision are complex and multifaceted. Some historians have argued that the study was driven by a desire to advance racial segregation in the US South. By conducting a study on African American men who were likely to be poor and marginalized, the researchers may have been attempting to justify the notion that certain groups of people were inherently more susceptible to disease. Other historians have suggested that the study was motivated by a desire to advance the careers of the researchers involved. The Tuskegee Experiment was one of the largest and most prestigious studies on syphilis at the time, and it provided a significant amount of data for the researchers to publish in academic journals. By conducting a long-term study on African American men, the researchers may have been attempting to establish themselves as leading experts in the field. Regardless of the motivations behind the study, its legacy continues to have a profound impact on public health policy and medical ethics today. In 1972, the US government finally apologized for its role in the Tuskegee Experiment and established a commission to investigate the study and provide compensation to the surviving victims. However, this apology came too late for many of the men who had been affected by the study. According to officials, over 4 decades, an estimated 28 men from the county died prematurely due to untreated syphilis. Their stories would be remembered as a testament to human suffering at the hands of bureaucratic neglect. In addition to its impact on public health policy, the Tuskegee Experiment also had significant implications for medical ethics. The study highlighted the dangers of conducting research without informed consent and the importance of protecting vulnerable populations from exploitation. Today, these concerns remain relevant in light of modern debates surrounding vaccination mandates, genetic testing, and other areas of biomedical research. As we continue to advance our understanding of human biology and disease, it is essential that we prioritize the rights and dignity of all individuals involved in medical research. In recent years, there has been a growing recognition of the need for greater transparency and accountability in medical research. In 2013, the National Institutes of Health introduced new regulations governing the use of human subjects in biomedical research. These regulations included provisions requiring researchers to obtain informed consent from participants, and ensuring that vulnerable populations are protected from exploitation. However, despite these advances, many critics argue that more needs to be done to address issues of power imbalance and exploitation in medical research. For example, some have raised concerns about the use of orphan diseases as a means of exploiting marginalized communities for scientific gain. The Tuskegee Experiment serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of prioritizing human rights and dignity in medical research. As we continue to navigate the complexities of biomedical research, it is essential that we draw on this dark chapter in American history to inform our policies and practices. In 2019, a new film about the Tuskegee Experiment was released, sparking renewed interest in this tragic episode of American history. The film highlighted the stories of several men who were affected by including one man who contracted syphilis as a result of the researchers' actions. The release of this film marked a significant milestone in the ongoing efforts to raise awareness about the Tuskegee Experiment and its legacy. However, it also underscored the need for continued vigilance and advocacy in protecting human rights and dignity in medical research. As we look to the future, it is essential that we continue to draw on the lessons of the past. By prioritizing transparency, accountability, and human rights in biomedical research, we can work towards a more just and equitable society, one in which all individuals are treated with dignity. The story of the Tuskegee Experiment continues to unfold as researchers and policymakers grapple with the complex issues surrounding medical research and public health policy. As we navigate this ever-changing landscape, it is essential that we remember the men who were affected by this tragic episode in American history. Men whose stories are a testament to human suffering at the hands of bureaucrats. In 2018, a new report was released highlighting the legacy of the Tuskegee Experiment. The report found that the study's effects continue to be felt today, with African Americans remaining disproportionately affected by syphilis and other STIs. This finding is particularly concerning given the significant progress that has been made in treating and preventing syphilis over the past several decades. In 2017, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reported a sharp increase in syphilis cases nationwide, with African Americans accounting for nearly half of all new diagnoses. The report highlighted the need for targeted interventions to address the disproportionate burden of syphilis among African Americans. However, it also underscored the ongoing impact of systemic racism and inequality on public health outcomes. As we continue to grapple with these issues, it is essential that we draw on the lessons of the past, including the tragic legacy of the Tuskegee Experiment. By prioritizing transparency, accountability, and human rights in biomedical research and public health policy, we can work towards a more just and equitable society, one in which all individuals. In recent years, there has been a growing recognition of the need for greater diversity and inclusion in medical research. In 2019, the NIH launched a new initiative aimed at increasing participation from underrepresented minority groups in biomedical research. However, despite these advances, many critics argue that more needs to be done to address issues of power imbalance and exploitation in medical research. For example, some have raised concerns about the use of orphan diseases as a means of exploiting marginalized communities for scientific gain. The Tuskegee Experiment serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of prioritizing human rights and dignity in medical research. As we continue to navigate the complexities of biomedical research, it is essential that we draw on this dark chapter in American history to inform our policies and practice. In 2020, a new report was released highlighting the ongoing legacy of the Tuskegee Experiment. The report found that the study's effects continue to be felt today, with African Americans remaining disproportionately affected by syphilis and other STIs. This finding is particularly concerning, given the significant progress that has been made in treating and preventing syphilis over the past several decades. In 2019, the CDC reported a sharp increase in syphilis cases nationwide, with African Americans accounting for nearly half of all new diagnoses. The report highlighted the need for targeted interventions to address the disproportionate burden of syphilis among African Americans. However, it also underscored the ongoing impact of systemic racism and inequality on public health outcomes. As we continue to grapple with these issues, it is essential that we draw on the lessons of the past, including the tragic legacy of the Tuskegee Experiment. By prioritizing transparency, accountability, and human rights in biomedical research and public health policy, we can work towards a more just and equitable society, one in which all individuals are treated. In 2019, the US government officially apologized for its role in the Tuskegee Experiment. However, this apology came too late for many of the men who had been affected by the study. According to official records, over 4 decades, an estimated 28 men from Macon County died prematurely due to untreated syphilis. Their stories would be remembered as a testament to human suffering at the hands of bureaucratic neglect. As we continue to navigate the complexities of biomedical research, it is essential that we draw on this dark chapter in American history to inform our policies and practices. The Tuskegee Experiment serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of prioritizing human rights and dignity in medical research. As we look to the future, it is essential that we continue to prioritize transparency, accountability, and human rights in biomedical research and public health policy. By doing so, we can work towards a more just and equitable society, one in which all individuals are treated with dignity and respect. The legacy of the Tuskegee Experiment will continue to be felt for generations to come, but by learning from this tragic episode, we can work towards a brighter future for all. As the years went by, the world began to change. The civil rights movement was gaining momentum, and the shadows of the Tuskegee Experiment were slowly being brought to light. In 1964, James Herbert Watkins, a doctor from Johns Hopkins University, stumbled upon an article about the experiment in the New York Times. Shocked and appalled by what he had read, Watkins decided to investigate further. Watkins' inquiry led him to meet with Dr. John Cutler, one of the lead researchers on the study. Cutler's demeanor was evasive, and his responses raised more questions than they answered. This encounter only fueled Watkins' determination to expose the truth about Tuskegee. He began a lengthy investigation, poring over medical records and conducting interviews with former participants. As Watkins dug deeper, he discovered that 28 men from Macon County had indeed died prematurely due to untreated syphilis. But this was just the tip of the iceberg. He also found that hundreds more had been left in the dark about their diagnosis, denied treatment, and watched as they succumbed to the disease. Watkins' research was met with resistance from those who sought to keep the experiment under wraps. The US Public Health Service issued a statement claiming that the men had signed waivers, absolving them of any responsibility for their care. However, Watkins knew this wasn't true. He had spoken directly to some of the men involved. In 1974, Watkins finally published his findings in the Journal of the American Medical Association. The article sparked widespread outrage and condemnation. Public health officials were quick to distance themselves from the experiment, but it was too late. The damage had been done. As news of the Tuskegee Experiment spread, demands for accountability grew louder. In 1975, President Gerald Ford issued an executive order calling for a thorough investigation into the matter. The subsequent report, led by Dr. Stokes, found that there had indeed been a deliberate effort to conceal the diagnosis and treatment of syphilis from the participants. The fallout was immense. Several high-ranking officials, including Cutler, were forced to resign or retire in shame. Others were subject to disciplinary action, but many more remained untouched, their careers unscathed by the scandal. In 1997, a presidential advisory committee recommended that those who had participated in the experiment be awarded compensation for their suffering. After years of bureaucratic wrangling, the first checks were finally issued in 1998. Each survivor received $37,500, a paltry sum compared to the long-term damage inflicted upon them and their families. The legacy of the Tuskegee Experiment continues to haunt America. In recent years, public health officials have spoken out about the ongoing disparities in healthcare access and treatment for African Americans. The consequences of this experiment can still be seen today in the lingering distrust of medical professionals among minority communities and the disproportionate burden of disease carried by those who were once subjected to such. One notable example is the case of Henrietta Lacks, a poor black tobacco farmer whose cells were taken without her consent at Johns Hopkins Hospital. The immortal HeLa cells have been used in countless medical breakthroughs, but their donor's family has been left to fight for compensation and recognition for generations. The Tuskegee Experiment also raises fundamental questions about the nature of power and control in healthcare. As we continue to navigate the complex web of research ethics, informed consent, and patient rights, we are reminded that even the well-intentioned institutions can perpetuate harm when driven by unchecked.
Today, the story of Tuskegee serves as a stark reminder that we must be vigilant in our pursuit of truth and justice.
We must continue to demand transparency from our government, medical professionals, and corporate entities, holding them accountable for their actions, no matter how egregious or hidden they may seem. As individuals, we have a crucial role to play in safeguarding our own health and well-being. By being informed about the research that is being conducted on us, by refusing to participate in studies that prioritize profits over people, and by advocating for ourselves and those around us, we can prevent future tragedies like. Here are 4 key takeaways for listeners. 1. Question authority. Never assume that those in power have your best interests at heart. Always demand transparency and hold them accountable for their actions. Stay informed, educate yourself about the research being conducted on you, and refuse to participate in studies that prioritize profits over people. Advocate for yourself. Speak out when you see something wrong, whether it's a biased medical study or an insensitive healthcare policy. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, trust your gut and demand answers. Your health and well-being are worth fighting for. The story of the Tuskegee Experiment serves as a poignant reminder that power can be both a double-edged sword and a poisoned chalice. As we continue to grapple with the darker aspects of human nature, let us strive to create a world where every individual is treated with dignity, respect, and compassion, regardless of their background or circumstance. The legacy of Tuskegee will continue to haunt America for generations to come. But by learning from this tragic episode, we can work towards creating a brighter future, one that prioritizes human rights, empathy, and as we delve deeper into the history of the Tuskegee Experiment, it's essential to understand the societal context in which it took place. The 1930s were a time of great social change in America, marked by the Great Depression and the rise of Jim Crow laws that entrenched racial segregation across the South. The U.S. Public Health Service, led by Dr. Herr Thurves, Eugene Dibble, a prominent African-American physician, was tasked with finding ways to combat syphilis in black men. However, their approach would ultimately prove devastating. Under the guise of providing free medical care, the PHS launched a 40-year study that deliberately withheld treatment from hundreds of men suffering from syphilis. The researchers claimed they wanted to observe the natural progression of the disease, but what they were actually observing was the devastating impact of untreated syphilis on these men's lives. They were denied penicillin treatments, even when it became widely available in the 1940s. Instead, they received ineffective remedies that prolonged their suffering. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of the Tuskegee Experiment is the story of Charlie Howard. A 36-year experiment is the story of Charlie Howard. A 36-year experiment is the story. In 1932, Howard was diagnosed with syphilis and recruited to participate in the study. His health declined rapidly, but he continued to receive fake treatments that only masked the symptoms. Howard's family suffered alongside him, watching as their loved one's mental and physical health disintegrated. His wife, Fanny, would often visit him at the hospital, begging the doctors for help, but they refused, insisting that he was still receiving treatment. The PHS researchers took notes on the men's conditions, documenting their worsening symptoms with disturbing specificity. They detailed how these men's lives were being ravaged by syphilis, their physical health deteriorating, their marriages failing, and their children growing up without fathers. As went by, the study expanded to include over 600 participants, but only a handful received actual treatment. The rest suffered in silence, unaware that they had been deliberately denied life-saving medicine. By the time the experiment was exposed in 1972, nearly all of these men were dead or dying. The Tuskegee Experiment has left an indelible mark on American history, raising fundamental questions about the ethics of medical research and the placed on human lives. It's a stark reminder that even in the most well-intentioned institutions, power can be abused and marginalized communities exploited. In 1902, a Senate subcommittee, led by Senator Edward Kennedy, uncovered the truth behind the Tuskegee Experiment, sparking widespread outrage and demands for reform. The US government was forced to confront its dark past and take steps to ensure that such atrocities would never happen again.
The legacy of Tuskegee serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of human dignity in medical research.
As we continue to grapple with these issues, it's essential to honor the memories of those who suffered and to strive towards creating a more just and compassionate society for all. The Tuskegee Experiment serves as a stark reminder that even the most seemingly well-intentioned institutions can perpetuate unimaginable suffering when unchecked power and racism are allowed to flourish. As we reflect on this dark chapter in American history, it's essential to consider the long-term impact of these events. The study may have officially ended in 1972, but its legacy continues to resonate today. In 1974, President Gerald Ford formally apologized for the government's role in the Tuskegee Experiment and established a commission to investigate other cases of medical experimentation on minority population. In the aftermath of this scandal, significant changes were made to ensure that future research would prioritize ethics and transparency. The National Research Act of 1974 was passed, mandating informed consent from participants in all government-funded studies. This landmark legislation established the Office for Human Research Protections, which oversees the ethics of medical research nationwide. The Tuskegee Experiment has also sparked a global conversation about the ethics of medical research and the importance of respecting human dignity. The World Health Organization has taken steps to develop guidelines for conducting research in vulnerable populations, while organizations like the American Medical Association have examined their own roles in perpetuating harm. As we reflect on this painful chapter in our collective history, ask yourself, what other dark secrets lie hidden beneath the surface of seemingly benevolent institutions? How can you stay vigilant and demand accountability for the actions taken in your name? We encourage you to share this story with someone who needs to hear it, a friend, family member, or colleague. Share it with those who may be unaware of the injustices that have been perpetrated in the name of science. If this story opened your eyes, subscribe to Forgotten History Daily. Every week we uncover the stories they don't want you to know. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and never stop asking questions. As the years went by, the truth about the Tuskegee Experiment began to unravel. But the impact on the families of the participants was only just beginning. The men who had been part of the study, or their survivors, struggled to come to terms with what had happened to them and their loved ones. Many felt betrayed, not just by the government, but also by the medical community that they had trusted. One of those affected was the family of Charlie Pollard, a 28-year-old sharecropper who was diagnosed with syphilis in 1932. When his wife, Ruth, learned about the study after her husband's death in 1954, she was devastated. "I felt like my husband had been used as a guinea pig," she said in an interview years later. They took advantage of him because he was poor and didn't have any education. The government eventually provided financial assistance to some of the families of the participants, but it wasn't until 1997 that President Bill Clinton The center's purpose is to investigate past medical research abuses and develop guidelines for preventing similar injustices in the future. One of the researchers who played a key role in exposing the Tuskegee Experiment was Dr. James Jones, a historian who spent years studying the study and its aftermath. In his book, Bad Blood, The Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment, published in 1993, Jones revealed the shocking details of the government's negligence and deception. Jones' work sparked a renewed interest in the story, but it also drew criticism from some who felt that the focus on the government's actions overshadowed the broader issues of racism and inequality in America. The Tuskegee Experiment was not just about bad science or bureaucratic mistakes, says Dr. Jones in an interview. It was about the systemic failure to protect the rights and dignity of African Americans. Today, the legacy of the Tuskegee Experiment continues to influence medical research and policy worldwide. The study's findings have been extensively documented and studied by scholars, policymakers, and medical professionals. But as we reflect on this painful chapter in American history, it's essential to remember that there is still much work to be done. Many advocates for human rights and bioethics continue to push for greater accountability and transparency in medical research. They argue that the lessons of Tuskegee should not be limited to a specific period or place, but should inform our actions today. The experiment is over, but the aftermath continues, says Dr. We must use this painful history as a lesson to prevent similar abuses from happening again. As we continue to explore the complexities and consequences of medical research on human subjects, it's essential to consider the Tuskegee Experiment serves as a stark reminder of what can happen when unchecked power and racism converge with scientific hubris. The study has also inspired new generations of activists, scholars, and healthcare professionals who work tirelessly to protect human rights and promote more equitable research practices. They draw on the lessons of Tuskegee to challenge just systems and advocate for policies that prioritize participant safety, autonomy, and dignity. In 2018, a new museum opened in Macon County, Georgia, to commemorate the lives of those affected by the study and honor their memory. The National Historic Landmark, also known as the Tuskegee Airmen Museum, features exhibits on the experiment, as well as the history of the Tuskegee Airmen and other African American pioneers who broke barriers in science and medicine. As we close this talk on the Tuskegee Experiment, it's essential to remember that the story is not just about a medical study gone wrong, but also about the ongoing struggle for human rights, justice, and equality.